Lake Mead has a number that nobody at the Bureau of Reclamation likes to say out loud: 895 feet. That is the level where Hoover Dam stops working. Not weaker output, not rolling cutbacks. Done. And right now, the only thing between that line and 40 million people is a lake still sitting below 35% full. Now, the number the Bureau does like talking about is the bounce back. Lake Mead rose. Good snow years pushed water levels up, and if you read a headline anytime in 2024, you probably walked away thinking the crisis was over. It is not over. And the detail that keeps getting buried under those bounce back headlines tells you exactly why. Every year, the Colorado River Compact promises 16.5 million acre-feet of water to 7 states across the American West. Every year, the river brings about 12. That 4.5 million acre-feet gap is not a drought problem. It is a math problem, and it has been there since 1922. This choice seemed small at the time. It was not. November 1922, Bishop's Lodge, New Mexico. Men from 7 states sat around a table to split the Colorado River. Herbert Hoover, who was the Secretary of Commerce at the time, ran the talks. Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, and New Mexico made up the Upper Basin. Arizona, Nevada, and California formed the Lower Basin. Each side wanted as much water as it could get, and Hoover's job was to divide it fairly. Here is the problem with the data they used. Stream gauge readings from the early 1900s suggested the Colorado carried about 17.5 million acre-feet per year. So the men split roughly 15 million between the two basins, set aside a share for Mexico in a later 1944 deal, and called it done. Fair split. Plenty of water. Except those readings came from the wettest stretch the river had seen in over 1,000 years. Nobody knew that in 1922, tree ring studies put out decades later by scientists at the University of Arizona rebuilt the river's flow going back 1,200 years. Over that full span, the long-term average sits closer to 12 to 13 million acre-feet. The whole deal was built on top of a freak wet period. That is not a typo, by the way. Every legal water share, every dam, every city water plan, and every farm contract on the Colorado River traces back to a number the river has almost never actually put out. For decades, that did not matter. Lake Mead and Lake Powell, the two huge lakes behind the big dams on the system, held enough stored water to cover the gap. Mead alone holds over 26 million acre-feet when completely full. Think of it like a savings account. When the river put in less than what the states took out, the stored water covered the rest. As long as the balance stayed high enough, the system held together. Then the withdrawals started beating the deposits. Not by a little, by a lot. And not for 1 year, for more than 20 years straight. Around the year 2000, a drought settled across the Colorado River Basin that has not left. Scientists at UCLA put out a study in the journal Nature Climate Change showing it is the worst dry stretch in at least 1,200 years, based on soil moisture records built from tree rings across the western United States. Snow in the Rocky Mountains, where the Colorado River starts, has been dropping. Temps across the basin have been climbing, which means what snow does, fall melts faster and dries up more. And the river's yearly flow has dropped roughly 20% compared to the last century's average. And this is where the science gets hard to read. Some climate scientists, including a team at Colorado State University, say this is not a dry spell in the normal back-and-forth sense. They call it a lasting shift toward a drier climate driven by rising temps. Under that view, the wet years of the last century were the odd ones out, not the dry years we are living through. Others, including water experts at the Bureau of Reclamation, point to the strong snow seasons of 2023 and 2024 as proof that natural swings still play a big role, and that the basin could see wetter decades again. Both sides agree on one thing. Even if wet years come back, higher temps mean the river will make less water per inch of snow than it used to. Warmer air holds more moisture, pulls more water out of lakes and soil, and speeds up the melt. So even a bounce back in snow does not mean a full bounce back in river flow. The river that 40 million people count on is a different river than the one the deal was written for. Meanwhile, demand kept growing. Las Vegas expanded. So did Phoenix and Tucson. Southern California's farm operations in the Imperial Valley, one of the most fertile growing regions on the planet, kept pulling their full share. Roughly 2/3 of all the water flowing through the Colorado system goes to farming, not cities. And nobody was willing to take less. Pay attention to this next detail, because it explains everything that followed. Lake Mead peaked at nearly full in the summer of 1999. By the summer of 2022, it had dropped to roughly 1,040 feet above sea level. That is about 27% full, over 20 years of steady, grinding decline. Along the canyon walls around the lake, the bathtub ring tells the story in white stains. A band of dried minerals stretches over 170 feet above the waterline, marking where the surface used to be. Sunken boats that went under in the 1980s showed up on dry ground. A World War II-era landing boat rose from the mud. And in the most unsettling finds, human remains turned up in more than one spot along the shrinking shore, some in barrels, some simply uncovered by water that was no longer deep enough to hide them. But what came out of the water was not the real alarm. What was happening inside the dam was, Hoover Dam makes electricity through spinning machines called turbines that sit at the base of the wall. Water flows down from the lake through giant steel pipes, drops 700 feet, spins the turbines, and makes power for roughly 1.3 million people across Nevada, Arizona, and Southern California. An elegant system, but one that depends entirely on water pressure, which depends entirely on water height. Below about 1,050 feet, the turbines start losing power. Output drops. Engineers at the plant have to change how things run, cut the load, sometimes shut down generators entirely. Below 950 feet, making electricity becomes hit or miss. And at 895 feet, the water sits below the dam's lowest drain. Nothing flows through on its own. What is left is a dead pool. Millions of acre-feet of water stuck behind a 726-foot wall that can no longer send it anywhere. Think about what that actually looks like on the ground. In Las Vegas, a city of over 2 million people that gets roughly 90% of its tap water from Lake Mead, dead pool means every shower, every lawn, every restaurant, every hospital, and every fire hydrant depends on a backup system that was never built to be the main source. Henderson, Boulder City, and towns across the southern tip of Nevada would face the same cliff. In Arizona, the Central Arizona Project Canal, which moves Colorado River water uphill across 336 miles of desert to Tucson and Phoenix, counts on water released from Lake Mead. Dead pool does not just shut off a dam, it shuts off a canal that serves millions. Downstream of the dam, the river does not stop mattering. Farming towns along the lower Colorado in Arizona, California, and Mexico get their water through a system of channels and canals that only work when water flows through Hoover Dam. All of that stops at 895 feet. During the 2022 low, Hoover Dam's power output had already fallen by about 25%. A plant that once made over 2,000 megawatts at full strength was putting out a fraction of that. Electricity costs for towns downstream jumped, and for the first time in the dam's history, the Bureau of Reclamation put out forced cutback orders, slashing Arizona's share by roughly 512,000 acre-feet and Nevada's by 21,000. If you are wondering how the government picks who loses water first, so is everyone in Arizona. Water rights on the Colorado run under a rule called prior use. First in time, first in right. California holds the oldest rights in the lower basin, which means in a shortage, Arizona and Nevada take the cuts before California gives up a single drop. That pecking order has fed lawsuits, state-to-state fights, and deep bitterness for the better part of 100 years. And then there are the tribal nations. Groups like the Navajo Nation, the Gila River Indian Community, and the Colorado River Indian tribes hold some of the oldest water rights in the entire basin. Some of their claims are older than the states themselves. But decades of being passed over for funding left many of these communities without the pipes to actually use what they are legally owed. They have rights on paper and dry taps in real life. A Navajo woman named Darlene Arvizo spent years hauling thousands of gallons of water by truck across the reservation in New Mexico, bringing it to families who had no running water. Not because the river had gone dry, because the system that carries the river's water to cities and farms was never built to reach her community. That gap between what the law says and what people can actually use is not a side note. It runs through the entire Colorado River story. Down in the Imperial Valley of Southern California, a farmer named Mark Stein watches the water talks from a different angle. His family has grown winter lettuce, broccoli, and alfalfa in the desert for 3 generations, using Colorado River water brought in through the All-American Canal. Imperial Irrigation District holds some of the biggest water rights in the lower basin. One district, feeding about 500,000 acres of farmland, uses more Colorado River water than the entire state of Nevada. Stein knows the math. He has said in local interviews that if the river keeps shrinking, someone in Imperial Valley is going to lose their share, and when that happens, grocery prices across the country will feel it. About 2/3 of the winter vegetables eaten in the United States come from this valley. Not from local farms, from desert farming running on borrowed water. Then came the reprieve that made everything harder. Winter of 2022 into 2023 brought heavy snow across the Rocky Mountains. Colorado River headwaters in the Wind River Range, the Uinta Mountains, and the peaks above Grand Lake saw far more snow than normal. Lake Powell started rising, Lake Mead followed. By mid-2024, water levels at Mead had climbed to roughly 1,065 to 1,075 feet. Headlines cheered. Lake Mead bounces back, water crisis easing. And on paper, those stories were right. Levels did rise. The near-term Deadpool threat backed off. But here is what every one of those stories left out. Yearly river flow did not change. How much water people use did not drop. What changed was a couple of good snow years in the mountains, which comes and goes, does not last, and depends on weather that no one can predict or promise. The bounce back topped up part of the savings account. It did not fix the reason the account keeps draining, and the timing of what happened next was almost too perfect. While news outlets were filing their bounce-back stories, the Bureau of Reclamation was quietly running updated models for the next 10 years. Under worst-case guesses, continued drought, no change in how much water people use, below-average snow, those models showed Lake Mead dropping toward Deadpool by 2027. Not as a forecast, as one possible outcome among several, sitting in extra review documents that rarely make the evening news. Those models are worth paying attention to because of how they work. The Bureau runs hundreds of test runs using different mixes of water coming in, water going out, and policy changes. The hopeful runs assume snow stays above average and water-saving targets get met. The middle runs assume average conditions. The dark runs assume the long drought keeps going and nobody cuts back. Deadpool by 2027 showed up in the dark band. Not the most likely result, but a real one, under conditions that already held true for 20 of the previous 23 years. Even the middle-of-the-road cases paint a tough picture. A return to average snow with current water use shows Mead sliding back below 1,050 feet within a few years. And remember, 1,050 is where Hoover Dam's turbines start struggling. The line between bounce back and crisis is thinner than the headlines say. The trend bends downward unless either the river brings more or 40 million people use less. And nobody controls the river. If you are finding this useful, subscribe. We cover water crises and geography news as they happen, with the full picture you need to follow what is going on. By early 2025, the real fight had shifted from emergency drought response to something even harder. 7 states were supposed to be working out new water rules for the Colorado River to replace the ones that expire after 2026. Those current rules include the 2007 Interim Guidelines and the 2019 Drought Backup Plan. Together, they set up a step-by-step system of water cuts triggered by Lake Mead's level. Below 1,075 feet, Arizona takes a cut. Below 1,050 feet, deeper cuts kick in. Below 1,025 feet, California starts losing water for the first time. These rules were always meant to be short-term. They bought time. They did not fix the core problem. The post-2026 talks are where the real fight lives. Upper Basin states say they have never used their full legal share and should not give up water they are owed. Colorado alone claims rights to over 3 million acre-feet it has not yet tapped. Lower Basin states say the Upper Basin needs to promise a minimum flow downstream no matter what the deal says on paper, because the real river cannot keep up with the legal river. Mexico gets 1.5 million acre-feet per year under the 1944 deal and watches from the sideline with little power but real harm if flows drop further. What happens if the 7 states miss the deadline is the question nobody wants to answer out loud. Without a new deal, the federal government could step in. The Secretary of the Interior has the legal power to set the rules alone if the states fail to agree. That has never happened on the Colorado River, and every governor in the basin knows it would mean losing control of their own water future. The threat of Washington stepping in is supposed to push the states toward a deal. So far, it has mostly pushed them toward blame. California, with the biggest economy and the oldest rights, has the least reason to agree to big cuts. Arizona, still raw from being the first state hit with forced cutbacks in 2021, wants a fairer system. Nevada, the smallest water user in the lower basin, has done the most to save water and feels it should not be punished for that. Each state reads the math differently because each state loses differently. 16.5 million acre-feet was promised. Roughly 12 gets delivered. Somebody has to swallow the gap. And the river that feeds all of them keeps shrinking while they argue about who takes the hit. Pat Mulroy, the former head of the Southern Nevada Water Authority, who spent decades working through Colorado River politics, has been open about the timeline. She has said in several interviews that the Basin states are running out of room to make a deal, and that every year of delay makes the final cuts deeper and harder to spread fairly. Mulroy helped push through the building of Las Vegas's third straw, a $1.5 billion tunnel drilled into the bottom of Lake Mead at 860 feet below the dead pool line. Vegas planned for the worst. Vegas did more than drill a straw. The Southern Nevada Water Authority built one of the most intense water recycling systems in the country. Nearly every drop of water used indoors in Las Vegas gets cleaned and sent back to Lake Mead for credit. The city tore out fancy grass, banned new front lawns, and pays people to swap turf for desert plants. Per person, water use in Las Vegas dropped by about 40% over 2 decades, even as the city grew by roughly 800,000 people. Las Vegas looked at the math, saw it did not work, and changed course. Not everyone else has. Across the basin, total water use still tops what the river brings. Cities and farms in Arizona, California, and the upper basin states have been slower to match the kind of hard cutbacks Vegas made. And the way the compact works makes it nearly impossible to force cuts without everyone agreeing. 40 million people are hooked into a system where the math is broken, and the legal setup needs near total agreement to fix it. And then there is the dam itself. Hoover Dam was finished in 1935. It stands 726 feet tall and holds roughly 3.3 million cubic yards of concrete. For 90 years, it has held back the Colorado River. And for most of those 90 years, the Bureau of Reclamation has been watching something slowly happening inside the concrete. A chemical reaction called alkali aggregate reaction. It happens when certain compounds in the cement mix with minerals in the gravel and sand that make up the concrete. That reaction creates a gel that soaks up water and swells. Over decades, the swelling builds pressure inside the dam that can cause tiny cracks, surface bulging, and slow warping. The Bureau of Reclamation has known about this at Hoover since the 1950s. They put over 1,000 sensors inside the dam, tracking warping, stress, temperature, and moisture. Yearly checkup reports describe the reaction as ongoing, measurable, and under control. They have filled cracks, drilled relief holes, and updated their tracking methods over the decades. The dam is not falling apart. That claim is overblown and wrong. But under control does not mean fixed. It means watched. The reaction is still happening. The dam is still getting older. The original giant steel water pipes, the ones that carry pressurized water to the turbines, have been in use since the 1930s. The spillways, which have only been used twice in the dam's history, in 1941 and 1983, would need to work perfectly in a high water emergency. And the whole power system is running in conditions it was never built for, mainly low water levels that cut the pressure needed to spin the turbines at full strength. Congress saw the repair gap across the West when it passed the big spending law in 2021, putting roughly $8.3 billion toward Bureau of Reclamation water projects. That money covers dam safety, water recycling, ocean-to-freshwater research, rural water systems, and aging equipment repairs. Some of it goes to Hoover Dam work, including pipe checks, generator rebuilds, and upgraded sensors. But the money is spread across hundreds of sites in 17 western states, and the Bureau's own list of delayed repairs already runs into the billions. To put that in context, Hoover Dam is just one of roughly 490 dams the Bureau of Reclamation runs across the West. Glen Canyon Dam, upstream on Lake Powell, has its own aging problems. Shasta Dam in California, Grand Coulee Dam in Washington, and dozens of smaller dams all pull from the same pool of federal dollars. The $8.3 billion is the biggest single investment in Western water systems in decades, but it covers a fraction of what the full system needs. What needs fixing far outpaces what any single bill can pay for. A civil engineer named Jennifer Moreno, speaking at a 2024 conference on Colorado River systems, put it plainly: every factor this system was built around has moved in the wrong direction. The river is smaller, the climate is warmer, the population is bigger, and the equipment is older. Pick any one of those, and you have a problem. Put all four together, and you have what the Colorado River Basin is dealing with right now. Nobody was watching that combination 20 years ago. Now it is the only thing anyone in Western water policy can talk about. So here is where things stand. Lake Mead sits below 35% full, behind a 90-year-old dam with known concrete problems that are watched but not fixed. 40 million people count on a river that brings 12 million acre-feet against 16.5 million in legal promises. Farmers in Imperial Valley grow the country's winter vegetables with water that may not be safe past next year. Tribal nations hold the oldest rights they still cannot tap. And the rules keeping the whole system from falling into legal chaos run out after 2026 with no new deal in sight. Bureau of Reclamation forecasts released in early 2025 show a range of outcomes for the rest of the decade. Hopeful models, the ones that assume more snow keeps falling and water-saving efforts stick, keep the lake above 1,000 feet. Middle ground cases show a slow slide back toward danger zones. And the dark forecasts, tucked away in extra documents that rarely make headlines, show the lake drifting back toward the numbers nobody at the Bureau likes to say out loud. Nobody is calling for Deadpool next month. The bounce back was real. It bought time. But buying time only works if you use it, and so far, no one has agreed on how. The system that Bounce Back is holding up was built for a river that ran 17.5 million acre-feet through a desert that held half as many people. Neither of those things is true anymore. 40 million people are still tied to a legal deal written over 100 years ago during a wet stretch that never came back. The dam holding it all together is closing in on its 100th year with a chemical reaction in its concrete that cannot be undone, only watched. And the rules that keep the water flowing run out next year. As of today, 895 feet is still exactly where it has always been. The only question is what is moving toward it.